Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Irish-Hellenic Society, now new and improved and on Zoom. And since our founding in 1962, I can honestly say that there has hardly been a more unusual time than the present time. We're meeting in what's called webinar format, and while you're getting used to it, you will gradually find that the buttons at the bottom of your screen can be used, for example, for something called chat. So you can type in a question after our speaker has finished, and he will be glad to answer. I'd just like to explain that I'm wearing the chain of office of the Irish-Hellenic Society for a very specific reason, because this chain was donated by Patsy Lyle and her late husband, John Lyle, who was laid to rest today. And our event this evening is dedicated to John Lyle, who was with Patsy, was a great friend of Greece and visited Greece on many, many occasions, especially Athens, over the last 5 decades. I would like to read a little appreciation which was written by Petros Florides, who was our first president in 1962, and who says the following: "Dear President, members of the Committee of the Irish-Hellenic Society, and friends, we are all shocked to hear of the untimely passing of John Lyle earlier on today." This was the 9th of October. "To his beloved wife, Patsy, and children Sarah and Jason, we express our deepest sympathy and share their pain. For as many years as one can remember, both John and Patsy served the Irish-Hellenic Society either as presidents, committee members, or just as ordinary members, passionately and with utter dedication. In 1974, shortly after Turkey invaded my home island of Cyprus, a Friends of Cyprus in Ireland committee was set up to help with the immediate problem of the resulting 200,000 refugees. The help of John, Patsy, and her mother Madeline, who served as a secretary of the Friends, was simply invaluable. On a personal level, I would like to express my deepest and heartfelt gratitude to them all. Farewell, dearest friend. You shall always be in our thoughts for your kindness, your friendship, and your love for Greece and Cyprus. Petros and Despina Florides." I think all of the members of the Irish-Hellenic Society can join with Petros and Despina in giving our sympathy to Patsy and to John's family at this time, especially on this day, the day he was laid to rest. I'd now like to introduce our speaker for this evening, Theo Dorgan. Theo is one of the best known figures in the arts in Ireland. He's a poet in his own right. He's also known for his work on radio, on television, and for a wonderful program most recently, which you can see, I think, on the RTE player, about the Great Book of Ireland, which was his idea. And I really urge you to look at that program. Theo has produced books of poetry in the 90s, in the 2000s, and again in this decade. And we had the pleasure in the Irish-Hellenic Society of him entertaining us in Dublin Castle on one occasion with Sappho's Daughter in St. Patrick's Hall, and again in the Arts Club, in the United Arts Club, with his second last book, which was called Greek. And on this occasion, his new book is called Orpheus. It's a beautiful volume, and I certainly recommend it to you with Christmas coming up, especially. It's a huge piece of work, and if you think it's easy to write how many pages? huge numbers of pages. How many pages are there? 77 pages, each with 4 stanzas in sapphics. As a famous Mayo man once said, try it sometime. It's extremely tricky. Theo, I'd like to hand over to you, please.
Thank you very much, President. And before I say anything at all, I'd like to express my condolences to Patsy and to John Klein's son and daughter. I know that for all you long-time members of the Society, this is a great blow and a great loss. And it's perhaps a larger loss because anyone who has dedicated their life to the long and necessary conversation between Ireland and Greece deserves the thanks not just of us, but of both peoples. I wish John Lyle eternal and peaceful rest, perhaps by the shores of some celestial Aegean. The figure of Orpheus has been central to our concept of the lyric poem for millennia. And there's a perfectly good reason for that, because in the construction of the myth, they got the architecture right. The extraordinary longevity of Greek myth, I think, is down to the fact that the architecture, the archetypal story at the heart of each myth resonates through all sorts of cultures and through all kinds of readings. We're used to, for instance, and I've written about this, we're used to the idea, there's the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, where he goes down, Mr. Macho Man goes down into hell to rescue Eurydice, and then he blows it by looking back over his shoulder. But of course, in a contemporary read, maybe it was none of his business. Maybe she was down there making her own soul, making her own choices, and he interrupted the process. And it's perfectly feasible, taking the framework of the myth to put that read into it, and it discloses something new about the human condition to us. So the myths are polyvalent, and they are constantly living, but so is the lyric poem. And Orpheus is the embodiment of the lyric poet. Modernism, Augustinism, all of the fashions that come and go in poetry have their place, and some magnificent work has been produced in these forms, but it comes back always to the singing human voice. And I think that perhaps was what the Nobel Committee had in mind when they saw fit, quite correctly in my view, to award a Nobel Prize to Mr. Bob Dylan, perhaps the greatest Orphic figure of our time. I've been traveling to Greece now for about 35 years. I was born in Cork, which of course has an inclination to the south, and it was the source of a great deal for decades of good-humoured banter between myself and Seamus Feeney. I could never understand his attraction to the cold wastelands of the north, and he was, like a good Ulsterman, suspicious of the soft, sunny and languorous south. But I'm glad that he saw sense in the end, and towards the end of his regrettably short life, he began to discover Greece and discover the magic inherent in it. I have a particular draw to Crete, but then more recently, in recent decades, to the Eastern Aegean. The first time I was there, in fact, was in the company of a respected member of the society and a very dear friend, Michael Yulton, on the island of Chios. And it was on Chios that I wrote all in one go, the first half of Sappho's Daughter. But then after Chios, we went to Lesbos, Paul and Meehan and myself, and we were at a concert given by Markopoulos, that great man, and the Castro, when somebody we'd fallen into conversation with explained that down there was where Orpheus's head came ashore. And then many, many years later, I was possessed by the thought that perhaps Orpheus was reborn. And the second half of Orpheus deals with that. The first half is a contemporary setting. It's an exploration of what it is to be an Orphic singer, a lyric singer in the present moment. But I'm going to read tonight from the second half because there is some quality of the eternal, I think all of us have found, in the Greek air and in the Greek light and in the Greek sea. And anything one feels is possible there. Certainly more than possible that Orpheus would be reborn there. Towards the close of this sequence, the second half of the book, I focus on locating the lyric singer in ordinary life. There is this pernicious post-Victorian notion that poets have nothing to do with the ordinary, with the everyday. It's where we live. And I don't see why Orpheus wouldn't either. In fact, he fell for a woman who owned a pub, which is a very sensible thing for a poet to do. But before that, I thought I'd read from when Orpheus is still living in the underworld from an earlier book. It's called Jason and the Argonauts. It was in fact a libretto commissioned by the Royal Albert Hall when they rebuilt the organ there. And they commissioned Howard Goodall to write the music, and they commissioned me to write the libretto. And I have Orpheus joining the shipmaster and Jason on their quest for the Golden Fleece. So I'll just read the epilogue and the prologos and the epilogos to that to give you a sense of an early Orpheus in my imagination. The sea was all my heaven once, the wind that was my mother's voice, the oak and pine that stood above the sea-bright rocky precipice. I loved the fisherman's white house, the wine shop and the mountain farm, the temple in the sacred glade, all men had made to keep from harm. Here is no light of sun or moon, we do not live, we are not dead. I keep the stories I have made with salt and wine inside my head. Now, from the upper world you ask, a tale to help the evening pass. I send a shade to walk and speak, but cannot come myself, alas. And Orpheus accompanies the voyagers on their trip to Colchis and back, and all that happens in between. And then the epilogos is, my harp is hung among the stars, a tall ship in the bowl of night. Your hungry voices reach me here like birds that flee from earthly light. The sea above me is a vault, and ancient chaos lies beneath. Into this darkness you must come, the dust of time beneath your feet. The world is rich in wave and grain, city and meadow, rock and rain. Cherish the world while yet you can. You will not pass this way again. Here is no light of sun or moon. We do not live. We are not dead. We do not hear the music that resounds inside your golden head. I sent a man to walk and speak. His tale is told, and now he sleeps. Cherish the story while you can, that I still guard, and you must keep. It seems to me quite reasonable to suggest that Orpheus is constantly manifesting in our poets in all our languages, in the minds and in the hearts of all of us who cherish Greece and who cling fast to the strong and secure architecture of these enduring myths. It does not, of course, absolve us of the responsibility to live in the here and now. And perhaps the challenge always is to make it new, to make it live again. I wrote this Orpheus, I wrote it all in Icaria. Let me treat you to a quick look at my t-shirt. You see that? To Eleftheres Politeia Icarias. Icaria is a most remarkable island. I've written or finished 7 books there, including this, which came straight through in a month. The best way to describe it is West Cork at 36 degrees south. They have that classic mindset. It's a profound island of the Mehel mind. They built the airport at the top corner of the island in such a way that you can't land jets, only prop-driven planes. Thereby, at one stroke, having seen the horror that Mykonos has become, they absolutely made it impossible that mass tourism would interfere with their way of life. Much the way that the doughty farmers of Beara have resisted having a motorway driven through to Castletown, Beara and Alahis. It's a marvellous island and a very welcoming island. And for some reason, and there's no point in trying to work out the puzzle, an enormously productive place for both Paula and myself. We've long since lost count of the amount of work we've done there. I suspect it may be because we never meet Irish people there, but we are prepared to make an honourable exception for the members of this society. But please don't tell your friends. It's really important that we don't. But there, I suppose it would be honest to say haunted by an idea of Orpheus. I began this book. And I began it with imagining or witnessing, I can't say, Orpheus being reborn. Tender they nursed me, cradled my severed head, circling in moonlight under the spreading oak, passed me from hand to hand, kissing my eyelids, called up from the dead. Wind buffeted the moon, vault of stars above, wheeled with the night's passage. They sang until dawn flushed on the sea below. Songbirds started up from deep in the grove, note borrowed note, song gave me breath, breath gave bone, gave start, made quick. I stood before them, half blind, staggered into the chorus, naked and cold, knew myself alone for all that sweet company, their generous gift of song and life again, their blithe disinterest. The woods took them, the wind gathered force, I gave myself to that lift. You remember that Orpheus was torn apart by the Maenads for some unspecified transgression, and perhaps these are their daughters, or the daughters of the daughters of their daughters, who took pity on him, as women so often take pity on men, and brought him back to life again. Horsemen in the valley below, high clear air all around me on the sun-cracked crags. Unseen, cousin to eagle, I watch them drive the game. Height makes me severe. My mind moves on judgment, on memory. These thoughts displease the god, threaten his favor. What's past is past, dismemberment undone. The women, that story, gone to the clouds of night, embers of firelight. Shadow play of the tale-tellers, old men who record and invent to beguile day, to people fearful night. I scan the braided rivers lifted here to search out the places where willows grow, sacred to Helice, necessary to me. The god lets these horsemen go. Alder is rampant, willow takes the field, reeds bend in their golden acres by riverbank. I let the old flute fall, I make one new, find always what I need, and find myself again. Bird notes ring out clear, now flute weaving follows, threading the hollow groves, floating out over the silver rivers. What was far, now near. Old skills, old bones made new. I doubt my old art and yet walk out morning after morning, sure that the path can be trusted, that now remade, I know my own part in this retelling. The women made me new. The stones that tranced out of memory dance now, and trees lift up their arms to know that up here everything runs true. There's a danger always. We've seen it ourselves when an American lands in Shannon, heads straight for the Aran Islands, and then writes a book of poems explaining us to ourselves. There's always a danger of becoming a tourist in the myth, a tourist in the place, of not simply looking to see how people live, actual people as valid as us, not picturesque, not postcards in the making. And it's a difficult line. It's a difficult line to follow into a poem which depends for its structure on a myth. It's difficult not to sound a false note, I suppose. And the solution always is to trust the earth, to let the earth and the air and the sea itself speak to you and, when necessary, speak for you. And that seems to give a ground. Irish people are very drawn to Greece, not just because that eternal light and high clear air is the antithesis of our boggy, marshy country, but also because there's something in us that lifts. Something is always in the Irish lyric mind. You can feel it in the music. Something is always prepared for that lift into the otherwhere that is also here. And I hope, I'm the last person to judge, but I hope that the otherwhere that is also here comes true in the poem. Lyre on the ridges, hands sweeping the bright strings like waves making towards the sun-white shore below. Pipe in the pine grove, breath so easy and clear, the new tune takes wing. Sleep deep in the cave, wrapped in bearskin, wolf pelt folded under my head. The god sent me dreams, the stars in the cave mouth, if I woke early, scribed out what I felt. Crane scratch and glyph, thin sharp notations of a point scratching across the infinite sky. Waking and sleeping, I felt myself swung between mark and strophe, as if something or someone was writing me out on the screens of night and day. I kept sane by keeping score, pipe in the mountain grove, lyre notes down to the sea. They said of Orpheus that he could make the stones sing. He's remembering this because you see he has to remember who he used to be now that he has been made new again. But it's the old dance with tradition, isn't it? I mean, I had the great good fortune to have that superb composer and musician Colmach an Umara set Sappho's Daughter to music. Many of you probably were there in 2012, 2013 in St. Patrick's Hall in Dublin Castle when the piece had its premiere. In fact, it was broadcast again 3 weeks ago on Lyric. And I'll send your chairman the link to that if any of you wanted to follow it up again. But the challenge with tradition is not to play it note for note as it has always been played, but to play the tune and let the tune speak itself in a new way, in a new fashion. Back in the long before, I was enchanter and arrogant with the gift. I could make stones move, made me famous for it with their talk, muttered sorcerer as I passed, silently crowding to my heels, and I confess I liked it. The awe they felt, a kind of sustaining echo to my own, cold air to anneal the blade of thought. Now I am found enchanted. The song sings me and gives me pause. The God intends this. Such has been made known. Reborn in silence, I have recanted belief in my power, surrendered my one art to itself. By sea, by cliff, by woods I walk, tending the busy music of what happens, entranced with my part. It is profoundly unfashionable to say so, but I have believed all my life that we don't write the poems write us. That our business is to make the engine, the artifact in words that contains the and gives a home to, an airy habitation and a place to the energy of the poem. The next section, of course, is you can't live in isolation. Nobody can live in isolation. And gradually he becomes aware that down there, down off the mountain, beyond all this entrancing sense of power and rebirth that he's feeling, life is going on, and he begins to be drawn to it. This book and at the previous volume, Greek, have now been published in Greek, in Hellenica, in translations by a very fine poet, Socrates Kabaropoulos. And he's very kindly made a translation available, and the chair has kindly agreed to read the Greek translation of this next bit. So perhaps, Paddy, I'll read the English first, and then you might kindly read the Greek. Down in the villages, I know they hear me. How could they not? These builders of terrace walls, tenders of vine, crop and flock, charcoal makers, diligent, busy people. I admire them, keep myself apart all the same, can feel kinship without needing to be among kind. Mine is not a solitary art, that's what I mean to say. And if they can hear me when I play, they hear it all. Hesitant starts, blank silence, whole liquid runs. I give it all. I can let it be, and so can they. Learning again how to play as a child would, fingering without forethought, not careless and not unconscious, just keeping out of my own way.
Kato sta choria, xero oti makun. Posta borusa na yini alios. Oli afti, puchtizun pezules, frondizun ambelia, sodies, que popadia, tiachnun carvuna, I epimelis, polyascili anthropi. Tu stav maso, cratieme homos macria, boro nagnotho engitata, choris naima apparetita anamasatus, idi kibu δεν είναι μοναχική τέχνη, αυτό θέλω να πω, κι αν μπορούν να μ' ακούσουν να παίζω, τα ακούν όλα. Διστακτικές εκκινήσεις, λευκές παύσεις, απαλές αλληλουχίες, τα προσφέρω όλα. Μπορώ να τα αφήσω όπως είναι, και εκείνοι το ίδιο. Μαθαίνοντας πάλι να παίζω όπως ένα παιδί, δακτυλίζοντας χωρίς προηγούμενη σκέψη. Όχι αδιάφορα και όχι ασυνείδητα, αλλά χωρίς να στέκομαι εμπόδιο στον εαυτό μου.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ πάλι. Πολύ καλά, πολύ καλά. So down he goes, down to the village, and he gets a job. Hard-working people. I watched them come and go in and out of the narrow lanes, back and forth from the small, neat harbour. I saw they watched me too. I made myself slow in my movements, let my shoulders fall. I did not want to draw more than a fair attention, did not want to stand out. I let my hands show. I was a shepherd, I said easily, answering a blunt question from a man who stood square in my path. Up there, a vague wave to the heights behind me. Work is what I want. I could do with a man. I turned as they laughed, a small knot of women, one there who was tall and frank, long black hair cascading to cocked hip. I was hooked and gaffed. Rhea, her name was, grey eyes, forceful and cool, kept a taverna and kept good order too. I was for manhandling barrels, heavy work, tasks that any fool could manage with ease, holding his mind at bay. I had a room that looked out over the sea, a flat roof where I'd sit before night, watching the hawks fall and sway high on the darkening ridges up above. The god had gone away, no prompt in the heart to unsettle me without warning, no start from the deep dark grove to set my blood rushing, no fears, no cold sweats, and no music. That was a sweet, soft release. It pleased me, brought ease to my days. I had ceased to fret. But nothing is forever. The great sway of things through the cosmos and a dance that never stops, men circling the world about their business, wild creatures, birds that sing when the light comes back, children as rooms grow dark, mothers whose daughters give birth, scarce born themselves. I was adrift on slow whirls of heavy thought, unwilling to mark time, trying to fit in and at the same time hold myself apart. Some shepherd, that fella, I overheard a farmer say, something on his mind. I'd say crime of passion, looks the type. Difference does that, I've found, engenders malice in simple folk, but I had no art to hide from his cold thought, that poisoned dart. Well, you'll be glad to hear he does fit in the end. He makes a good job of it. But of course, he's constantly being drawn back up to the mountain. And somewhere along the way, I won't read the piece, he realizes that his problem with Eurydice was not that he looked back and condemned her to stay in Hades, but that he lacked trust. He could not trust her. He did not sufficiently trust her. But there's good news in store because he's about to fall for Rhea and she for him. They built a garden. It's funny, there's an old Zen saying I'm sure you're familiar with, you know, when in trouble, sweep a garden, any size. And it's very good advice and it's kept me off the rocks on more than one occasion. But he builds a garden with her. 7 terraces climbing the slope. Walls first, a stone at a time, the hands learning heft and fit until each flat rock seemed to flow at its own pace, a burst of blind energy at the start easing to smooth pace as the days followed on, fluent grace falling into place, her hands to my hands, sure, slow, settled and true. Start in the half-light before dawn, the sky clear, working down from the great cairn as the first birds start to call from tree to tree. Easier to carry down from there than carry up, she had said, and not for the first time or the last. I admired her common sense. We found no need to speak, companionable, thoughtful, and immersed. Well, you can see he's fallen for her. And he does. And I'm keeping an eye on the clock in the top right-hand corner of the screen here. She stood in the doorway. You see, he thinks she doesn't know who he is. A mistake that many a man has made in this world before and since. Think that I'm a mystery to you. You wouldn't understand me. Well, she does. She stood in the doorway, shadow against sky bright with stars, lamplight picking out runnels and hollows, the folds in her simple dress. I rose, did not ask her why now, after all this time she had come. I knew. Leaf smoke in the air, harvest, full plenty, grave joy, heartfelt words, plain talk. We rose into the night, we soared, we flew high beyond anywhere we had ever been, and yet stayed in body that had known body in the long day's work. We were ourselves, made free of what we had been. And then, at the full end of all, soft and clear as day, she said, I have always known who you are. Sing me a laughing daughter. Sing me a child who will know no fear. And so I hope, for now anyway, I've brought Orpheus home to a good place, solid berth by the sea, part owner of a taverna on the Aegean, and who knows where he'll surface next. I'm reading these poems to you, and we're all linked in this extraordinary electronic network, and I'm having the most immense difficulty not floating off, not into the poems themselves, I'm not that vain, but into the landscape, that landscape so many of us have come to love, that other place that we call home. And perhaps soon, we'll be able to go home again with a little nod as we pass the grove and the hillside to Orpheus, working out a new tune.
Mis ευχαριστούμε, Theo. That was wonderful. I really, really enjoyed it, Theo. And to my mind, when I go to Greece, I love to revisit the old places and see some new places. And I think that's what you've done in this book. You've revisited the old myth of Orpheus, but you've also brought something new to it. And I congratulate you on it. I'd like to ask you what it was that made you go to Greece. What brought you to Ikaria, of all places? And did you really write this in the space of a month? Come off it.
Sorry, Paddy, I had nothing else to be doing except just bask, you know. I went to Ikaria for, it was a curious story, actually. Paula, my partner, had been going to Greece for even longer than I was. I mean, when she was 17 or 18, she settled in for 6 months in Greece on the olive harvest, the orange harvest. She even learned to cook in a taverna over an open fire with a hole in the roof to take the smoke out, and every now and then the old lads would go out and fire their rusty revolvers into the air. So she had been going a long time, and I've a little less long. I had been traveling there, but Paula was working on a collection, and at the time she was teaching a poem at the Musée des Beaux-Arts by Auden, which looks at that extraordinary painting, Bruegel painting of the fall of Icarus. And Icarus is a tiny little, an unnoticed footnote in the bottom right-hand corner. You know the painting in the bottom right-hand corner of it. And of course, it's a Flemish landscape and Flemish ox pulling a Flemish plough, but there's Icarus falling in the sky. So she was working on the book, and she needed to go somewhere to finish it. And we were just literally wandering the web and came across this place we'd never heard of, Ikaria. And so I said, well, ring the woman. So Vula Manuloro. What an extraordinary character. A wonderful, beloved woman. So she rang Paula and said, but we are closed. And Paula said, that's okay, it suits me. But you will be on your own. Exactly, said Paula, that's what I need. So she flew into Athens. Vula swept her out of the airport, out to her house in Paeania, back to the airport the following day, had her housekeeper meet Paula when she landed into Ikaria, and flew out herself 3 days later to make sure that she was all right. So that was late spring, and we both went back again then in September, and we've been going there now for 11 or 12 years. In fact, we should be there right now. We should be broadcasting from there. They haven't had a single case of the virus on the island, and when we were going to go a week ago. What's it, 14? No, 12 days ago. And then the numbers in Dublin started climbing, and we thought we couldn't have it on our conscience to risk bringing it with us. So, we haven't been there this year, and we're in bits about it. But it is, I mean, I was being semi-jocose when I said it's like West Cork at 36 degrees south. There is that air of familiarity, of self-sufficiency, of kindness to each other that the people have without any palaver or any putting on any side about it. All Hellenophiles will understand what I mean when I say we go back and somebody passes on the street and you get the look that says you're back, and then a simple dignified nod. None of this, oh, you're back, welcome, that you get in the tourist traps. And we love it there. They let us alone or they'll talk to us depending on what we feel like. And I hope we do the same for them. But it truly is, and I think probably everybody here, all 33 of us, we understand this. There is some mystery about why Irish people feel so at home in Greece. It's a love of liberty, of course. It's the trust in tradition as well as innovation. And it's probably because we have the habit here still of making time for each other. And that is especially in the islands, but even in Athens or Saloniki, or you find the same. People have time for you. How many of us have had the experience of stopping someone to ask for directions, and you're brought straight to the cafe and sit down, you're brought a coffee. I'll tell you how to get there, but who are you now? Where do you come from? And what brings you here? And sure, the day is gone before you know it. It's like walking into McCarthy's bar in Glastonbury, I haven't really explained anything, have I, Paddy? It's just I'm having to drag myself back from the island here, But
Well,
yes, I did actually write it in a month. Yes.
Wow, wow.
Well,
I salute you for that, because it's extremely interesting. I really do recommend people to buy the book and cherish it, because there's a huge amount in it, and I think you'll enjoy it greatly. It's very unusual to have a whole book written in 1 meter, and it's an unusual meter. Why was it you chose Sapphics in particular, Theo?
The whole damn thing came out of a simple experiment. I thought, well, I like the meter anyway, and it's been very, very little used in English.
Yes.
But I thought, well, meters take root for a particular reason. I mean, the hexameter suits a sailing culture. The pentameter suits a rowing culture, if you know what I mean. So all of Shakespeare is an iambic pentameter. It's a steady rowing, but the hexameter. So Jason, for instance, when they're rowing, it's in pentameter. When they're sailing, it's in hexameter, because there's a slightly looser feel to the whole thing. But I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, well, maybe meter reflects the mentalité, the mindset of a place, and the psychogeography of a place. And I thought I'll write a little poem about Orpheus as an experiment in Sapphics to see how it can be done. And sure, I tripped on the threshold and fell into the room, and I didn't leave it for a month. It just rolled out. It was the same in Chios when I was visiting Mike Goulton in Chios, and the first half of Sappho came in. It was like taking dictation. Now, I may be from Cork, but I'm not an idiot. If I'm given dictation like that, I shut up and write it down. And it was remarkably easy. I sent my dear friend Kieran Carson, who died a year ago, just a year and a week ago. I sent him, we'd always send each other work, and I just got back a quick first email saying, I've got meter envy. Because Kieran was a magnificent verse craftsman, first class poet, but a wonderful craftsman, and he got it straight away. I'm not sure that I could describe a monster final in Sapphics, or a trip down pre or post COVID Grafton Street, but it seemed, it's a meter of the place. It's only a few miles up to Lesbos from Icaria, so it's of the area. But I certainly didn't expect a whole book. I thought I'd write this and just see what. But one of the things that lyric poem needs is to feel good in the mouth when you speak it, and it has to feel good in the mouth, and it did. I mean, it worked out very neatly, and. Don't hear it, you have to go and look for it. Sometimes I was lucky and it came in automatically, but they say that it takes 10,000 hours to learn a craft. So I mean, think 10,000 hours plus a month, Paddy, went into the book.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Well, my only experience of Icaria, Theo, is stopping off on it en route to Samos on one occasion, and there was a huge sign saying, "Welcome to our radioactive island," because I think there was some radioactivity in some of the baths there.
We stay in Therma, which does have radioactive baths, and they're remarkable. I mean, you don't go around glowing at night or anything, but they are immensely restorative, especially for pulmonary disorders. Very good for the bones as well. And I must confess to spend an hour every day when I'm there, lying there in the waters without a care in the world, which is not my normal way of going about, I can tell you. Yeah, it's a healing mess. I must tell you something else about Icaria, which is interesting in the given that we're only a few days away from that remarkable High Court decision to damn Golden Dawn as a criminal organization. Back around 08, 09, 10, there were these bowsies were cruising around from island to island attempting to hold rallies. And they were on that ferry that you were on, the one that goes on to Samos. And she docked in Agios Kyrikos. And for some reason, the Astronomia, the police had decided to start looking at tax discs at the other end of town that day. And a good portion of the island met the boat, and as the ramp came down and these lachicos appeared with their flags and their black t-shirts and combat trousers, they were told, well, I won't use an impolite term, but you can imagine what they were told. Let's say it was made clear to them that they were not landing. Off they went. Icaria still votes, still a strong KKE, still a strong Communist Party, but as Antonis Papalas, the great historian of the island, pointed out, the newspaper of the Communist Party looks like something from the 1950s. And when an old comrade dies, and they could live to a great age, there's always a photograph in standard 1950s proletarian garb, a dark jacket and the white shirt with the points of the collar out over the lapels. And then followed by a list of all the great services the late comrade has done the party, followed by a list of all the great properties he's leaving to his family. So they have their own version of communism as they have their own version of everything else, you know. Marvelous place.
So Theo, I'd like to thank you on behalf of all of our members and on behalf of those who will view this on the Irish-Hellenic Society's YouTube channel, which is also an innovation. And I wish you many, many years happily writing poetry on Icaria, the fount of all inspiration for you, obviously. Not Helicon, but those radioactive baths certainly seem to have done it for you.
Well, so something needed to cure me. And I hope that in subsequent iterations on YouTube, that when people do see this, that they will think of John and they will say a prayer for him if they are praying people, but that the work that he and you and the society have done, that it lives on. I want to thank Todoris for the technical mastery of this event. I want to thank you all for staying with us. We still have 31 of the 33 left. And Paddy, I want to thank you and the committee for the work you do and for your very kind invitation. It was a pleasure to accept it.
Thank you very, very much, Theo. I wish you good night, and to remind you that on the 11th of November at our next meeting, we will have Margaret Desmond talking on ancient Rome reimagined as a fire regime. Not radioactive this time. Thank you very much, Theo, and good night. All the very best.
Bye.
Καλώς σας βράδυ.